I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of who I was. The doctor said I'd been in a coma for 6 months after a devastating car accident. My face was reconstructed, my body broken, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to discover when I finally made it home. I stood outside my house, the white picket fence I built with my own hands, the garden my wife loved. Everything looked the same, but something felt terribly wrong. I turned the key in the lock, but it didn't work. Confused, I rang the doorbell, and when the door opened, I saw him, a man who looked nothing like me, standing in my doorway, wearing my clothes. And then she appeared behind him, my wife Sarah, the woman I'd loved for 15 years. She looked at me with fear in her eyes and said words that shattered my reality. "Who are you and what do you want?" I tried to explain. "I'm David, I'm your husband." But she stepped back, her hand gripping the stranger's arm. "My husband is right here," she said, pointing to the man beside her, and that's when I noticed the wedding ring on his finger, my ring, the one with the inscription "Forever Yours" that I had engraved before our wedding. He looked at me with cold eyes and said, "I think you have the wrong house, buddy. You need to leave." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. How could this be happening? I pulled out my wallet to show my ID, but when I opened it, the face on my driver's license looked different. The reconstructive surgery had changed me so much that I was unrecognizable. Even to myself, I tried to show them my documents, but Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Please just go, you're scaring me." The police arrived within minutes. The imposter had called them, and as they questioned me, I realized how insane my story sounded. A man claiming to be someone else, standing outside a house that wasn't legally his anymore. They escorted me away, and I watched my home disappear in the distance. The place where I'd planned to grow old with Sarah, where we'd dreamed of raising children. All of it was gone, stolen by a stranger who was now living my life. I spent that night in a cheap motel, staring at my unfamiliar reflection in the mirror, wondering if I was losing my mind. But then I remembered something. My best friend Marcus. He would recognize me. He would know the truth. I drove to his apartment the next morning, my hands shaking as I knocked on his door. When he opened it, I saw the same confusion in his eyes, but I didn't give him a chance to turn me away. I started telling him stories, memories that only the real David would know. The time we got lost in the woods during our camping trip. The secret handshake we created in college. The night he called me crying after his father died. And slowly, I saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. "Oh my God, David, is that really you?" he whispered, pulling me into his apartment. I told him everything. The accident, the coma, the surgery, and the nightmare I'd come home to. Marcus listened in disbelief, and then he told me something that made my blood run cold. "David, there was a funeral. We buried you 6 months ago. I felt the room spin." "What are you talking about? I'm right here." But Marcus showed me the newspaper clipping. Dr. David Morrison, beloved physician and husband, died from injuries sustained in a car accident. There was a photo of Sarah at the funeral, dressed in black, crying over a closed casket. "They never let anyone see the body," Marcus said. "They said you were too badly injured, that it would be too traumatic." I realized then that someone had orchestrated this. Someone had stolen my identity while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Someone had convinced everyone I was dead. But who and why? Marcus and I started investigating. We went to the hospital where I'd been treated. But the records had been altered according to their files. The patient in that bed wasn't David Morrison. It was a John Doe with no identification. Someone had switched my records, erased my existence from the system. We discovered that the death certificate had been filed by a Dr. Richard Chen, a physician I'd never heard of. When we tracked him down, we found something shocking. Dr. Chen had been fired from the hospital 2 years ago for fraud, and he'd disappeared. But there was more. We found a connection between Dr. Chen and the man living in my house. His real name was Thomas Webb, and he was a former patient of mine. I'd treated him for severe depression after his wife left him and took everything. He'd lost his job, his home, his entire identity, and apparently he'd decided to steal mine. But Thomas didn't do this alone. Dr. Chen had helped him, falsifying records, creating fake documents, even arranging for a closed casket funeral with an unidentifiable body. They'd exploited my accident to give Thomas a fresh start. My life with my wife, my home, my career. Everything. We went to the police with evidence, but Thomas had been careful. He'd learned everything about me, memorized my history, convinced everyone he was the real David Morrison. Sarah believed him. My colleagues believed him. Even the hospital where I worked had welcomed him back with open arms. He was living my life better than I ever had. The detective assigned to the case looked at me with skepticism, even with Marcus vouching for me. It seemed impossible to prove who I really was. DNA tests would take weeks, and in the meantime, Thomas had filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was a delusional stalker who'd become obsessed with him after reading about the accident in the news. I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. But then I remembered something that Thomas couldn't possibly know. A secret that only Sarah and I shared years ago. Before we were married, Sarah had a miscarriage. It was a painful time we never spoke about. We'd buried a small box in the garden, under the oak tree, containing ultrasound photos and a letter we'd written to the baby we never got to meet. Thomas wouldn't know about that. I contacted Sarah through Marcus, begging her to meet me in a public place. She agreed reluctantly, probably out of curiosity when we met at a coffee shop. She sat across from me with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was a stranger. And I was to her. I told her about the box under the oak tree. I described exactly where it was buried, and I told her what was in the letter, the specific words we'd written, words we'd never shared with anyone. I saw her face change, the color draining from her cheeks. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Because I'm your husband, Sarah. I'm David. The man in our house is an imposter." Tears streamed down her face as she realized the truth. But she was terrified. "What if I'm wrong? What if you're the crazy one?" I took her hand and said, "Go home, dig up the box, read the letter. You'll know I'm telling the truth." That night, Sarah went to the garden. Thomas was working late or so. He claimed she dug under the oak tree and found the box when she opened it, and read the letter she knew. The handwriting, the intimate details, the love we'd poured into those words. It was undeniable. But when Thomas came home, she confronted him, and that's when he revealed his true nature. He became violent, threatening. He told her she could never prove anything, that everyone would think she was insane if she tried to expose him. But Sarah was smart. She recorded the conversation, captured his confession, his threats, everything. She called the police, and when they arrived, she played the recording. Thomas tried to run, but they caught him, and as they put him in handcuffs, he looked at me with pure hatred. "You had everything," he spat, "and you didn't even appreciate it." Dr. Chen was arrested too, along with several others involved in the conspiracy. The truth came out slowly, painfully, as everyone I knew had to accept that they'd been deceived, that they'd mourned the wrong person, celebrated an imposter. The hospital apologized. My colleagues were shocked, but Sarah, she was devastated. She'd been living with a stranger for months, believing he was her husband. The trauma of that betrayal would take years to heal. We started over, slowly, going to therapy together, rebuilding trust, relearning each other, because even though I was David, I was also different. The accident had changed me. The experience had changed me, and Sarah had changed too. But we were determined to find our way back to each other, and we did. Month by month, we rebuilt our life. It wasn't the same life we'd had before. It was something new, something forged through pain and survival. And maybe, just maybe, it was stronger because of what we'd endured. Standing in our garden 1 year later, looking at the oak tree where we'd buried our secret, I realized that identity isn't just a name or a face. It's the memories we create, the love we share, the choices we make. Thomas had stolen my name, but he could never steal who I really was, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about never giving up, even when everything seems lost, because your identity, your truth, is worth fighting for.